Hey, welcome or welcome back to the stash. Now I guess I should just say right off the bat, I love X-Men 97. And now I know you already know that since of the title, but who cares? This show is just that good. I was skeptical at first. The trailer didn't do much for me and the original photo reveals felt a little bland in all honesty. I was nervous. Were they really going to be able to bring back that old beloved show and manage to recapture the same magic it once had? But man, let me tell you, when I grabbed some popcorn, turned off the lights, sat down ready to watch the first episode, and then the iconic, beautiful, remastered theme song started blaring, I felt like I was falling in love with the X-Men all over again. You see, obviously I'm a massive Spider-Man fan. I mean, I got this entire channel, a whole bunch of action figures, an unhealthy amount of comic books, the mask, the web shooters, and much more. But there's one part of the Marvel universe I've yet to really explore here on YouTube, and that's the X-Men. Now, just like Spidey, I can't get enough of them. I collect almost any comic or figure I see relating to the X-Men, especially if it's to do with the classic Jim Lee or Chris Claremont era. Now for me personally, my main three in Marvel has always been Spider-Man, X-Men, and Daredevil, but for a long time, due to the rights issues, Marvel in a way just banished the X-Men. They fell almost into obscurity, with the core fanbase who grew up with the comics or the 90s TV show barely being able to keep them afloat. It was just such a dark time to be an X-Men fan. I question if they would ever be able to reclaim their top at the spot, and sure they had their movies, but with only a very few good entries, or decent at best, if anything, it was just sort of doing more damage than good. Especially since they were pretty much all terrified of the source material.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Now growing up, I had DVDs to every single Marvel show, whether it was all those classic 90s ones or the more at the time contemporary spectacular Spider-Man show. Obviously I had my favorites that I just keep on coming back to, and one happened to be a certain X-Men show from the 90s. Now, it's safe to say that these first few episodes are just permanently engraved into my head after watching them around 1,000 times each. This one single DVD introduced me to the bright and colourful world of these band of mutants known as the X-Men. From Storm, to Beast, to Professor X, Jubilee, Rogue, Gambit, Wolverine, Jean Grey, Cyclops, all of them. I felt like I had joined their family each time I pressed play on the menu screen. Now fast forward to the present day, and it's like that same family I left welcomed me back with open arms to continue the story I so desperately wanted all these years. With all that being said, I think it's time to talk about why I love this show. One quick little reminder though, we are trying to hit 1,600 subscribers. Hey everyone, it's me from the future editing this video, and well, obviously while recording this one we hadn't hit 1,600 subscribers, but while editing this now, we've already passed it and on to 1,601, I think. So just thank you all for the incredible support. I can't believe it. And you know what? Yeah, let's go for 1,700 subscribers before the end of the month. I know that's a huge ask, but with the recent support, I believe we can do it. So thank you all again, and back to the video. Before the end of the month, so if you like X-Men or just comic content in general, feel free to stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button. But anyway, with all that being said, let's get straight back into the video.
To me, my X-Men. Surrender, mutant.
This show fucking rocks. It literally doesn't get better than this. In fact, we haven't actually been at this level in such a long time. But a lot of the praise for this gem has to go to the writer Bo DeMeo. This man blew my expectations right out of the water. I've become so desensitized to the modern writers just tainting the source material or whatever came before it so they could lazily attempt to reinvent the wheel, that having someone like him come in and actually put so much effort and love into what is going to be one of the best stories in an animated series in such a long time, it just made me so happy. This writer, he just gets it. Like every week during each release, he'd converse with fans about the show and even dish out homework assignments for viewers who aren't really familiar with the books. That right there, I just think it's so incredible, and it's so rare within this industry. He managed to use the source material as his most powerful tool while creating something that's still new and fresh, you know, giving this story, this show, its own unique identity. One that I'd say is almost separate from the original due to just how good it is. Now, just like the OG series, the writer and the whole team took inspiration from the best decades of the X-Men books. In majority of the episodes, readers would notice inspiration from classic stories during the 80s, 90s, and even some from the early 2000s. One aspect that I think worked perfectly for the show was basing this version of Magneto more or less off the 80s character, the comics I should say, rather than the 90s. But more on how, the characters were handled later. But just the way that this show is a beautiful combination of all these well-acclaimed stories from the comics while adding something new to the mix to really make it its own just creates this perfect blend for a comic adaptation. It's not embarrassed or terrified of its roots. In fact, it actually embraces it.
Oh, hey. Almost forgot.
Am I going to war or a circus?
What'd you expect? Black leather?
The way that this show as a continuation handled the direction and tone it wanted to take was perfect. A fault a lot of the reboots do have is that they almost forget that the main audience they're appealing to, the people who grew up watching the original show, are no longer kids. In X-Men 97, we explore much more mature and overall darker themes. It also helps that they are no longer having to confide within the restraints of 90s network television. I actually applaud for how much it takes on in a satisfying manner. From societal intolerance to the struggles of being the ideal leader to identity crisis to a whole lot more. Due to the show being more mature, it allows for the narrative to become what it needs to be. It allows itself to become more sophisticated in a sense. It trusts us, the audience, enough so we're not having to be spoon-fed everything. It gives this continuation a real sense of continuity from where we left off. But that's not all. In fact, there's a lot of amazing factors as to why X-Men 97 feels like the perfect Season 6, so to speak. They managed to get this seamless transition from the original series while respecting its long-lasting legacy. It provides us a great sense of nostalgia for our love of the franchise, as well as a much-needed closure for the unresolved storylines. Now, my two personal most favourite factors have to do with the music and Marvel getting some of the original cast to reprise their role. Fan favourite Cal Dodd comes back to reclaim his spot as the rightful voice actor for Wolverine. Lenore Zane returns to play Rogue. I mean, was there seriously any other choice but her? Her distinctive southern accent is what many readers, myself included, hear when reading the comics. Now, George Boozer comes back to play the Beast, and I absolutely love the way he portrays the character. He has that perfect balance of Beast's well-known intellectual yet powerful persona. Chris Britton is once again Mr. Sinister, one of my personal favourite X-Men villains, and I love his intensely chilling performances of the menacing villain. The way his voice is able to haunt the characters is just so perfect for Sinister. Now, for what's got to be my absolute favourite performance in the show has to go to Alison Sealy Smith, who reprises her role as Storm. She sounds just like how she did in the 90s, if not better. The sheer elegance and beauty within her voice does justice to a character as beautiful and royal as Storm. During this show's adaptation of Life Death, it gives her talent a moment to shine. The entire scene of her getting her powers back mixed with her big speech, it gave me goosebumps. I just feel like during X-Men 97, Allison was able to go to deep depths within the character of Storm, making her easily one of the best characters within the show. Now, of course, not all could reprise their roles, and the two biggest additions being Ray Chase as Cyclops and Jennifer Hale as Jean Grey. Jennifer brings a very complex and captivating performance to the character, especially with the things she must face within these episodes. Ray brings much needed life within the character of Cyclops and overall played a hugely important part within the redemption of Scott Summers. Now, I generally just can't fault the cast. Each of them did a fantastic job at revitalizing all the characters of the animated series, making them feel fresh and alive again. And speaking of revitalizing parts of the show, how about that theme song? The original X-Men theme song is as much as an iconic part of the show as were the stories told. I guarantee you that if you go up to any fan who loves the X-Men and you mumble the opening da-na-na-na-na-na to them, they'll instantly light up. Like mentioned before, when I first heard the slightly updated version for the first time while watching episode 1, I felt so excited. Like I knew that this was just going to be one hell of a ride. The way they basically kept the original theme and intro while adding their own personal little touches was it was so thrilling. Every release, I'd point out each subtle change into the intro, whether it was new scenes or Storm's costume changing. In a way, the intro alone brought me back to my days as a kid watching the X-Men DVDs. It brought that version of me out again, and I couldn't help but just mimic the theme as it played each time. It doesn't even end at the main theme. The overall soundtrack of this show was unbelievably good. Just the variations animations of the main themes themselves were so brilliant and made any battle or big moment 10 times better than it already was. The music and voice actors just really added to the authenticity of X-Men 97. It made it feel like it's a real continuation and just not some cheap impersonation. The animation of this show was a major talking point before and after the release. In my case, before the show arrived, I was a bit worried that it was just going to be that really ugly and bland what if style, but I'm so glad I was wrong on that one. The overall look and feel of X-Men 97 is nothing short of breathtaking. Certain scenes just left me completely blown away. The action was incredible, with each fight scene feeling super fluid and engaging, especially when they got really grand with their sets, like the final fight with Bastion or the big first Sentinel fight in episode 1. And I also saw somewhere that they might have taken inspiration from the old arcade games like X-Men Children of the Atom or X-Men vs Street Fighter and so on. But if that's true, I'd love that. There's definitely instances where I thought to myself that I could have sworn I've seen that before, and it just adds to the overall richness of this show as an adaptation of X-Men. Even the slow, more tender moments of the show were still cinematically beautiful, from Magneto and Rogue's dance to the fabled world of the Shi'ar Empire. Just through the animation alone, you could really tell that the entire team actually loves the X-Men and cares deeply about what they create. It bleeds heavily into the work of the show, leaving it visible for all to see. It entices us to join within the world and explore the brilliance of the X-Men because people love what other people are passionate about, and since we're all X-Men fans, it just unites us together even more. Now, one more smaller aspect, I guess you could say, about X-Men 97, in which I personally was just enthralled about, was all the cameos, especially because it served multiple purposes. It wasn't just there to say, hey, look at that, like, isn't that cool? It was Mr. Fantastic or whatever. It was more. Like, granted, Morph in this show was used a lot for that sense of delight to see a well-known character like Hulk or, like I just said, Mr. Fantastic, but at least it was still him using his powers to help fight in battle. Now, just a quick little side rant about one thing that I do count as a negative about this show was Morph's powers. From what I believed and what I thought was the general consensus was that Morph could only change his appearance, hence his name, and not actually take on the power set, or else that would just make him quite literally one of the most powerful Omega level threat mutants known to mankind. There is some that you could sorta get away with, but for the most part it was a retcon that just didn't feel right. This doesn't mean I didn't enjoy his scenes, I personally loved them, but just the nature of it felt wrong. But anyway, back to what I was saying. I loved how near the end, during the big climax with all the human sentinels attacking all over the world, we see a bunch of heroes throughout the montage. There's the likes of Iron Man, Captain America, Black Panther, Cloak and Dagger, Daredevil, and the man himself, Spider-Man. Now, what I like about these cameos, which in my opinion perfectly justify their place in the show, is that it shows how Bastion taking over affects every part of the world from all the way in Wakanda to New York City. It adds to the severity of the villain's powerful threat and makes the overall Marvel universe just feel so connected. Also, another thing I loved about these heroes showing up was the confirmation that Spider-Man finally found Mary Jane Watson. That's right, the big cliffhanger of the 90s Spider-Man series has finally been solved, all thanks to this show, and the writer himself did confirm it, it was the case on Twitter, and it's the icing on the cake. I do also really appreciate how this show expands upon the mutant characters, obviously the main being the addition of Sunspot to the show. However, I'd argue that overall his addition, although appreciated, was not handled well at all. Majority of his time here, he just sort of served as the purpose of being Jubilee's love interest, and in most cases he was just really annoying. He was one of my very few complaints of this show. Again, I'm glad he's here, but I wish it was handled better than it was. Now, Nightcrawler was in the original show, but here, he's a part of the team. He's the real deal in this one. I love the way he bounces off the team with his constant kindness and love of religion and his faith. The way he uses his wisdom in times of need to help inspire those grieving and never giving up on people even when they themselves no longer have hope. Nightcrawler is easily one of my most favorite X-Men, and I'm just so happy with the treatment he got in this show, especially with him finally properly joining the team. The way X-Men 97 handled almost each and every character is nothing short of brilliant. Even for people new to the X-Men, this show perfectly introduces the team and how each member acts, and such to a point where you could use this series as your starting point because it's just that good. I adore how each character gets a moment to shine, whether it's Sunspot saving Jubilee in space or the entire redemption of Scott Summers. Jean Grey in this show undergoes the Madeline Pryor story arc, which causes for immense growth within her character as she tackles with the themes and concepts of who she really is and her own self-worth. Once discovered she's the real Jean Grey and not the clone, it's able to close the door on one mystery but then leave many open. All of this just adds to the immeasurable emotional and physical stress she has to now take on and carry. X-Men 97 allows Jean to confront her own identity, forcing herself to discover her own self-worth, not only as a wife to Scott or a member to the X-Men, but for her own legacy as a whole. This series is able to expand upon Jean Grey's character by diving deep within her powers, personal struggles, and relationships. The addition of her clone Madeline Pryor adds a much needed compelling element to her overall story in the show, especially with how it comes to Cable and the feeling of being inadequate since she was not the Jean that gave birth. I love it how at first they were both closed off and scared of opening up to each other, but by the end of it, Cable, Cyclops, and Jean finally came together and accepted each other as family. All this and more just makes her journey also captivating and emotionally rich. Now for Storm, one of my favorite characters in this entire series, I love the way they tackled her entire character arc, with majority of it being about the classic storyline life-death from the comics. During this, Storm loses her weather powers due to the mutant powers suppressing attack. As you would expect, the sudden shift from a goddess of the elements to a mere ordinary human affects her to the highest degree. Losing her powers forces Storm to confront her fears and her sense of identity and worth beyond her mutant abilities. The show emphasizes that true heroism is not merely defined by superpowers, but instead by one's own actions and everlasting spirit. Even with the temporary loss, Storm shows her inspiring resilience as well as leadership and inner strength. At the start, she was wishing for a life without her powers, to be normal. But after her journey, she realized that these mutant abilities aren't a curse. They're one of the most precious gifts one could receive in life. Now, another aspect of Storm's story that I just loved was her deep-seated fears, a prominent one being her claustrophobia. This stems from a very traumatic experience during her childhood where she was trapped under rubble. The focus a lot on this is especially in episode 6, where she has no choice but to confront this fear during an encounter with the adversary. Throughout the episode, she battles by great lengths with external and internal threats, and one being her anxiety to regain her powers and overcome what she so feared. Now, I view her struggle with claustrophobia more than just a fear she faces. In a way, it's a symbol for her need to break free from the constraints both physical and psychological. This theme resonates with her broader narrative of resilience and empowerment, as it shows that true strength often comes from facing and conquering one's deepest fears. This show it nailed it when it came to the characterization of Storm, allowing her to grow within her own right, separate from the X-Men, and showing the world that she is a force to be reckoned with. Now, Magneto in X-Men 97 has to be one of the most complex characters within the whole show, and at the same time, one of my favorites. This show took him in directions I would have never expected, and I found him just to be so compelling and captivating. His themes throughout this series resonate deeply with the grand narrative of the show. As usual, the core of Magneto's character and essence is a juxtaposition between his tragic past and his ideal vision of the future. The show leaves no stone unturned when it comes to dealing with his profound trauma and loss when mostly grounded in his experience within World War II. The show takes his already existing atrocities he's been through and builds upon that with the attack of Genosha, causing an even bigger uproar within Magnus, turning more and more people to his cause and leaving them all agreeing that no matter what, Magneto was right. This new element of Genosha added such a heartbreaking and interesting twist within the mindset of mutants and their stance on things. Mixing his past and new experiences together, it only strengthens Magneto's conviction that mutants must take control to ensure their survival. Magnus often battles within his actions of good and bad, which reflects his complex nature, and I liked how they handled his leadership role real early in the series after Professor X was presumed dead by most of the world. It showed his willingness to protect and lead the mutant world. Unfortunately, we soon see his methods separate from Xavier's ideals. One being of Asteroid M, showing his return to his old ideals of separating the human race from the mutants to ensure their safety and peace. Some of my favorite scenes when it comes to Magneto from X-Men 97 have got to be during some of the very dire and intense moments of the show. There's him lashing out during the massive attack on Genosha, then his electromagnet attack on the Earth after being freed from Bastion's captivity where he destroys the Earth's magnetic field. And lastly, him ripping the adamantium out of Wolverine's body. It was just so amazing to watch. Each one was just incredible. They showed why he's an Omega level threat, and in doing so made him one of the best spectacles of X-Men 97. Now for Rogue, she is forced to go through absolute hell during this series. They continue to explore the depths of her most wanted desire of touch, being able to feel someone. It was a major point in the original show, and here it's no different. You feel sorry for her. It's just no way to live, and you understand why her and Magneto had a thing in the first place. To finally be able to touch someone without fear of sending them to the hospital would be the biggest relief imaginable. I love the way that they handled her character, especially post Gambit's death. After that tragic day in Genosha where she had believed to have lost both Magnus and Gambit, she just completely went off the deep end, becoming a one-woman army. She even went as far as to kill while filled with grief. Granted, she didn't technically murder the person as he was a human sentinel, so he didn't actually die on impact, but I still think it was a bold and impressive choice to have done this. It's a cliche at this point where the hero would recompose themselves in the exact same situation and not do anything out there, but here it's just completely, it flips the script, and I applaud them for that. It makes Rogue feel real, like she's an actual person going through the worst time in her life, and she's bound to make mistakes. It was a brave choice, yet one that just paid off in spades. As a massive Gambit fan, I think it's safe to say that episode 5 broke me in many ways. During his time in the show, he brought every scene to life, and they really expanded upon his deep love for Rogue. In a sense, it was his main focus throughout the entire show. All he wanted was to finally be able to be with her. And then in episode 5, he played out all of his deck in hopes of finally winning Rogue over. However, it was not enough. We see him struggling to accept what is now his reality. What he doesn't know, and what is one of the most painful things about this as well, is that he doesn't realize, or he didn't have a chance to know, that Rogue in the end chose him. For what she can physically feel with Magnus is nothing in comparison to what she can emotionally feel with Gambit. During the attack on Genosha, the stakes are at the highest it's ever been within this show. And in one incredibly heroic display, he uses his kinetic energy in a last-ditch effort to save the remaining survivors of Genosha. However, it resulted in his death. A tragic and crucial turning point within the show, pushing Rogue to a place she'd never been before. She'd used to feel his love whenever he was nearby. But now as she holds his lifeless body in her arms, she can't feel a thing. They handled Gambit's death as well as you could have. Killing off a character as loved and as popular as Gambit is a humongous risk to take, and the people behind it themselves knew that how risky this was. It caused sleepless nights over it. You know, like when I first watched the show, the death of Gambit, it honestly made me cry. It brought tears to my eyes because Gambit, as my personal favorite X-Men out of all of them, I love the character to bits, and to see him just go out in such a heroic and meaningful way, it was so beautifully written and animated. It was incredible. Even, you know, you never want to see your favorite character die like that, but it was just such a spectacle to behold, and it was so emotionally captivating, and the whole thing was just incredible. I couldn't get enough of it. I love this show. I was so happy that they used his death as a meaningful event within the series that drives the story forward and causes such a rich and deep character arcs and themes, mixed with one of the best displays I've ever seen from Gambit through the sheer brilliance of the animation team. It just all round came together so passionately that it didn't feel cheap or unnecessary or whatever, but in fact it was one of the most powerful and unexpected moments of the entire show. X-Men 97 in many ways redeemed and saved Scott Summers' Cyclops. You see, throughout his time in the movies and even a lot in the original 90s show, he was written to be this uptight teacher's pet who'd mainly just argue with Wolverine for the fun of it. But man, this show just completely did a 180 with Scott and turned him into this more well-adjusted comic counterpart. Even in the show's first episode, we're straight away shown that this Cyclops is just so cool and different. The way they show off his powers and his unmatched tactical prowess allows for fans to really get into just how awesome Cyclops can actually be. He's just so full of his own personal style, and you just feel his energy radiate off the screen. It entices you with just how good of a character Cyclops can be with the right people behind him. Every scene he's in is just so captivating. He commands attention with each appearance as he generally feels like the rightful leader of the X-Men. Just like everyone else, Scott goes through his own personal demons and self-journey. A lot of it does come down to the pressure of Xavier no longer being on Earth, leaving him with much more responsibilities, especially with how he's almost the glue holding the team together in a sense. Another major thing he faces is his fear of following in his father's footsteps with Nathan. He doesn't want to make the same mistake his father did and miss out on Nathan's entire life. But due to Mr. Sinister, it's a must if he wants to ensure his survival. This really messes with Scott, and we see him, Cable, and Jean grow by the end of the series, whether it's Cable letting go of the past and accepting Jean as his mother, or Scott forgiving himself for what he had to do and finally saying a proper goodbye, or Jean just figuring out her own self-worth. The entire Summers family was handled so well and with so much care. I was always someone who liked Cyclops, even if he got annoying in the old show at times, but I'm just so glad that X-Men 97 did him justice. It's about damn time that someone wrote Scott properly and gave him the respect he deserves. I honestly could just keep on talking about each single character and how they had their own journey and all their themes and such, but this video would generally be an hour long. So, you know, I feel like it's a good sort of stopping point to leave it at Cyclops, the leader of the X-Men, but I applaud the team behind X-Men 97 for achieving such a beautiful masterpiece. I understand that behind the scenes it's pretty messy with the writer and him being fired. However, I'm glad that he managed to write this and Season 2 before all that happened, because man, he killed it. His perfect blend of the source material and new ideas was the core foundation of this incredible show's success. Each character goes through their own personal journey, and it's handled with such love and respect, with the creators allowing at least one moment each to really shine and just show the audience what they're about. The voice actors, the music, the animation, everything, it's just so good. I seriously can't get enough of it. In fact, I've rewatched the show several times because of how much it means to me. It brought back my favorite superhero team from the far depths within the Marvel Universe back into the forefront where they rightfully belong. This show saved the X-Men. They haven't been this popular in decades, and I'm so glad to see them get a new lease of life because it's the least they deserve. This was a true love letter to us, the fans of the original series and the comic books. It was a perfect continuation, and it's everything I wanted it to be and more. It helped me remember why I became an X-Men fan, why I fell in love with the magical world of the stories, why I became so invested within each and every character, but most importantly, it helped me remember why I love the X-Men. Everyone, thank you guys for watching. I wanted to add a little bit of a unscripted part at the end of the video just because of how big it was and such, and you know, I could really talk about this show for hours, like hours on end, but I didn't want it to go for too long, especially because now I gotta edit this after I finish the recording, which is gonna take a long time. But I really do hope you guys enjoyed. This was a passion project in a sense of mine. I loved the show to bits and I really wanted to talk about it, so I hope you guys, you know, I hope you guys liked it. And I'd love to hear what you thought of the show down below in the comment section. We can start a conversation. I mean, if you didn't like the show, I'd love to hear why not. And if you did, I'd love to hear why. It's a show that brought back the X-Men. It saved them a lot from almost falling into irrelevancy, and it just did them so much wonders, and I thank them for that. Just every character was handled so brilliantly, and it's just such a good show. So yeah, thank you guys again for watching. If you have enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, because here, any support means so much. Be sure to tune in next time, same web time, same web channel. Thank you guys again for watching, and see you in the next one.